The Syringe by J.P. O'Brien. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" asked Julian's mother as she burst into his bedroom. "I had a bad dream." "Not again," grumbled his father, following right behind. "That's the last 4 nights now." "They're getting scarier," the boy sniffed. "I'll say. That was the loudest yet." He then leant into his mother's ear and whispered, "I think now's the time." "Honey, no, he's too little." "It's fine. I must have been his age." Julian squinted at his parents' faces, but they were lost in darkness. The warm light from the landing leaked through the bedroom door behind them and gave them an eerie, almost sinister glow. He clambered over his bedsheets towards his mother's outstretched arms. "My poor baby," she said, patting down the blonde cowlick on the side of his head. "Hold on, Jules," his father broke in. "We've got something that we think might help." The boy pushed away a tear with the heel of his palm as his father rushed out of the room. When he returned, he was straining under the weight of a strange object. In the dim light, it looked like a glass fire extinguisher, but an ominous spear jutted out from one end, a needle the length of his forearm. On the other end, he could now make out a plunger. It was a giant syringe. Julian focused on the sharp tip at the end of the needle, and his sobbing dried up instantly. "What we have here will take away your bad dreams," said his father, admiring it. He then noticed the expression of horror on his son's face. "It looks scary, but I think it will do the trick." Julian looked up at his mother for reassurance. "It's okay, sweetie," she said with a loving smile. They removed the boy's pajama top and asked him to lie down on his front side on the bed. Julian, who had always trusted his parents, did as they said. With his face buried in the folds of the pillow, he could feel his mother lean down beside him, then place her soft hands on his shoulders. "Should be pretty straightforward," he heard his father say, although he now seemed to be addressing his mother directly again. Julian tried to turn his head, but her hands pressed even harder, pinning him down. "Stay still now," she said. "Be a good boy." Panic ran down his spine. Before he could protest, his father pierced the icy tip of the needle straight into the skin of Julian's back, directly between his shoulder blades. The pain as the metal point went in was excruciating. It seemed to shoot to the extremities of his entire body like lightning. He howled and squirmed, but his mother's grip held him firmly in place. He could feel his father's knee pushing down on the mattress between his legs as he drew out the flat, circular plunger slowly with his hand. The wet squelching sound made him feel sick. For several seconds, Julian scrunched his eyes closed into the pillow as he tried to block out the weird sensation of all his insides being pulled out. He felt like he was on the verge of fainting. When it was over, his mother sat him upright again, then wrapped her arms around her son's skinny torso. "Well done, my love," she said, squeezing him tightly. His father turned on the light, then held up the syringe victoriously. Inside the chamber was a strange fluid slopping around, with the appearance of sticky syrup, but black as the night. It seemed to move as if it were a film that had been slowed down, and it left dark, streaky stains on the inside of the glass. "How are you feeling?" Julian's father asked. "I feel weird," he replied. "Good weird?" said his father hopefully. "Do you still feel sad, darling?" His mother jumped in. "I don't know." "You shouldn't," his father pointed out. "We've drained all your sadness. Now there'll be no more nightmares." Julian lifted his hands up to his chest and ran his fingers over it. The skin felt clammy to the touch from sweat, but icy cold at the same time. He tried to focus on his insides. He supposed they should feel lighter, more relieved, but he could not quite work out how they felt. Whatever this strange procedure was, it seemed to have worked. His father carried the filled syringe out of the room while his mother brushed the boy's hair aside and kissed him on the forehead. She then gave him another affectionate squeeze as she inspected the mark on his back. As her fingertips got near, Julian expected to flinch from the pain, but he didn't actually feel anything. It was as if the fresh wound had been numbed with an ice cube. She put his pajama top back on for him, then tucked him into bed. "Good night, my love," she said, turning off the light and closing the door behind her as she left. Julian was soundly asleep within seconds. The next morning, the boy emerged in the kitchen rubbing his sleepy eyes. His mother was preparing breakfast, and his father was sitting at the table reading a newspaper. When they heard their son come in, they both turned their attention to him. "Ah, there's the champion," said his father, allowing the top half of his newspaper to flop down. "So, how was the rest of your night?" Julian had to think for a second. "I didn't have any bad dreams," he eventually said, taking a chair at the table. "I don't remember having any dreams." His father beamed with delight. "Aha, it worked then. I'll have to let Dr. Ryland know." Julian scratched his head as his mother spooned a pancake onto his plate. "What was that sticky black stuff? Was that my sadness?" "Exactly right." "Where is it now?" "I poured it down the toilet. Had a bit of a time with it, though. Couldn't stop crying while I was flushing it." He looked over to Julian's mother. "Took me a while to nod off myself afterwards, didn't it?" "You were a mess, dear," she added flatly. "So can I not get sad anymore?" asked the puzzled boy. "Well, you tell me." The youngster weighed his thoughts for a moment. "I don't feel sad," he said, tilting his head to the side. "Then I think we have a winner," concluded Julian's father, returning to his newspaper. And with that, the matter seemed to be resolved. Julian chewed slowly on a mouthful of pancake. He looked at each one of his parents in turn, but they carried on as if nothing had happened. But the method of disposal the previous night had been a little irresponsible of Julian's father. Once the black gunk had trickled through the toilet's drainpipe, it joined the wastewater system underneath their street. Before long, it had arrived at the sewage treatment plant on the outskirts of town. By the early hours of the morning, it had already begun contaminating the river. After breakfast, Julian returned to his room to start getting ready for school. He was still trying to locate a feeling, any feeling, but it seemed there was nothing to be found. It was as if he had been emptied. If what his father had said were true, then not a single drop of sadness remained in his body. But Julian wondered if anything else had been taken out as well. A moment later, a horrific wailing sound rang out from the kitchen. The boy rushed downstairs to find his mother crumpled on the floor, clutching onto the cabinet door with tears streaming down her face. The sink with the breakfast plates was spilling over with a dull, rotten-coloured water that continued pouring out of the tap. Her eyes were red and bloodshot. The sight of his mother in that state should have terrified him, Julian thought, but it was as if something inside him had been unplugged. He shouted to her, but she didn't seem to hear. When he hurried over to turn off the tap, his attention was again disrupted by a much louder cry coming from upstairs. "Dad?" Barging through the bathroom door, he saw his father bawling in turmoil while hunched over the sink, toothpaste foam dripping from his open mouth onto his shirt and tie. Once again, there was a dirty dish-coloured water flooding out from the tap. What's going on? He attempted to gain his father's attention, tugging on his clothes and calling out to him, but the man appeared completely oblivious to his son's presence. Something was very seriously wrong, Julian thought. But stranger still was how his insides were giving him nothing but a blunt numbness, as if he were watching events unfold through a pane of frosty glass. He ran back to the kitchen where his mother was still sobbing in a ball on the tiled floor and picked up the phone to call the police. They would know what to do. But when he was connected, all he could hear was a quiet blubbering on the other end of the line. He stumbled backwards and scurried out of the kitchen, leaving the telephone dangling by its cord. Out in the street, still in his pajamas, he tried to get the attention of anyone who would listen. "Help!" he shouted timidly. "Something weird is happening to my parents." Around him, people were heading to work, but none of them were paying any attention to his pleas. The same murky, colourless liquid was seeping out of drains along the road and forming in puddles around their feet. When Julian looked at their faces, he saw tears on their cheeks. Everyone was affected. Just then, an idea struck him. His best friend Kevin. His dad was a doctor and would surely have some ideas. He raced towards the Rylands' house. On the way, Julian stayed well clear of the miserable puddles that seemed to be expanding over the ground. He strode past several other bystanders who had been similarly overcome by this sudden, debilitating sadness. As he turned onto the end of Kevin's road, he saw a fountain of the liquid gushing out from the nearby storm drain, flooding the entire pavement in front of him. He scaled a brick wall and ran along the top so as to avoid coming into contact with it. When he got to the Rylands' back garden, he climbed up the tree and shimmied along a branch to bang on Kevin's bedroom window. His friend pulled open the curtain, perplexed to see Julian outside in his pajamas. "What are you doing?" Kevin asked, while opening the window and helping Julian inside. His eyes were still puffy from sleep. "Something weird is going on. Everyone's crying." "What are you talking about?" yawned Kevin. "My parents used this syringe thing on me. My dad said he got it from your dad." "That sadness thing? Oh yeah, my dad brought that home when I was having nightmares. Did you see that black gooey stuff?" "Yeah. Why? What's happening?" "How much did he take out?" persisted Julian. "Like this much. He was being really careful about it." Julian stared blankly at the tiny gap between Kevin's finger and thumb. His own father had extracted considerably more than that. "What did he do with it after?" Kevin scratched his head, unnerved by his friend's outburst of questions. I think he took it back to work with him. He said that stuff is dangerous. They need to throw it away properly." "Are you all right? You're freaking me out." "I don't feel—" began Julian. "Well, I don't feel anything." "What happened?" "I think my dad did it wrong," said Julian. "We've got to find your dad." He ran out of the room before Kevin could respond. From the top of the stairs, Julian could see puddles had already seeped underneath the Rylands' front door, staining the hall carpet with a dank colourlessness. He tried to brake as soon as he noticed, but tripped over his own foot on the top step and tumbled down. He landed face first into the damp carpet fibres below. He knew what was coming. Everyone else who had touched this weird liquid had been turned into a blubbering mess. But Julian still felt nothing at all. Kevin's worried face appeared over the banister. "Are you all right, Julian?" Julian didn't answer. If the muck couldn't affect him, he was the only one left who could do something. He splashed through the front door and out into the street, but his attention was instantly drawn upwards by a grey sky. The clouds appeared to be getting darker and more dense by the second, like a thunderstorm that was on the verge of exploding. All around him were countless people collapsed on the pavement, howling from sadness. Julian suddenly became aware that the wetness around his feet was much more than mere puddles. The rising black gunk, still pouring out of drains and manholes, had now flooded the whole street several inches deep and was steadily rising up over his ankles. It was only then he noticed that his friend was no longer with him. He spun back towards the Ryland house and saw that Kevin was now sitting inside the open front door in floods of tears. He had collapsed as soon as his bare feet stepped into the pool in his hallway. Seeing his friend like that ought to have felt like a punch to the heart, but it just felt too distant. Julian tried to wade back towards him, but the black tar clawed at his legs, refusing to let go. He made it about 3 paces before he couldn't move forward any more. When he looked up again, he saw that it had risen to the level of the Rylands' front windows, leaving streaky stains on the glass. In an instant, the gunk was up to his face. He tried angling his mouth as high as it would reach, pursing his lips to the sky so he could continue to breathe fresh air, but he eventually slipped beneath the surface. He juddered awake. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" asked Julian's mother as she burst into his bedroom. Julian looked up at her for a moment with profound confusion in his eyes. "I had a bad dream," he said again.
You have been listening to JP O'Brien Stories. For more, visit patreon.com/JP O'Brien Stories.